Welcome to the Geek 101 podcast. Road to Arrowverse Crisis, Episode 4. Legends of Tomorrow Season 1 and Supergirl Season 1. I'm here joined again by special guests Tessa and Sam. Say hello.
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 And we're going to pick up right in the 2015-2016 television year, covering the first season of Supergirl and the big show, the best show, but the best show that becomes the best show later, and despite having a terrible first season, Legends of Tomorrow. First, we're going to go ahead and start with Supergirl, because this is an interesting show to talk about. Supergirl started as a CBS show. It was a regular network show. CBS decided not to pick it up again, and each subsequent season was on the CW. And we're just going to go ahead and cover a few of the major characters, major moments of Supergirl Season 1. Tessa, Sam, did you guys enjoy Melissa Benoist as Carol Danvers?
Yeah, her Kara Danvers, I think anyone who watches this show will recognize her from Glee. That's where she got her start. I'm trying to think of anything else she's actually been in. I think she's been in a few other minor film roles, but she's definitely comes to us from Glee. And this particular character, I think, is a fun character. She's very, I described her before as infectious. She is very optimistic. We've talked about The Flash being an optimistic show, but I think that Supergirl is even more optimistic, if that's possible. While still dealing with some really hard things, as we'll talk about in season 1. But she's a fun character, and it's really cool to see Melissa Benoist get to play this character in sort of the shy, non-assuming way that I think the character is supposed to be played.
Yeah, and this, to me, my first reaction when I heard this was going to happen was, 4 years after we didn't get Wonder Woman on TV with Adrian Palicki, maybe this one will go this time. Maybe TV is ready for a not a dude superhero. And my second reaction was Melissa Benoist, her big story arc on Glee was a disempowered girl who was bullied into an eating disorder. So I think this is a tribute to her range that she was able to carry that off so well and play this very strong character. I think the other thing that's really interesting about this show is the way that CBS marketed it. The very first trailer for this show, even before the pilot was out, kind of made it look like this was going to be a rom-com, and Kara was going to be a goofy, klutzy girl in search of a man, like every bad rom-com movie ever. And there was a lot of early criticism having to do with that. It was nice to see from the pilot on that was not this show.
Well, but she is kind of goofy and klutzy. Not in a bad rom-com way, but I think it's nice to see a superhero, a female superhero, who also, has these sort of goofy, klutzy concerns, because I think that for a lot of female superheroes, they tend to overcompensate by making them these badasses with bad histories, and Kara doesn't have any of that. Besides, the destruction of Krypton, as part of her origin story, she seems to have a pretty, happy, well-adjusted childhood, and, happier issues maybe in her personal life than she does as Supergirl.
It's nice that it's a show about Supergirl protecting humanity from aliens and other threats, who also wants to do these normal real life things like find love, etc., and not the other way around.
Right, but I think unlike the trailers, they do manage to sort of straighten out the potential misogynistic version of this. I just remember, and I don't remember, I'm not very good at remembering which DC cartoons these come from, but I remember there was a cartoon, and I want to say it was a Batman-Superman team-up, where Supergirl comes to Earth, and there's the question of, what do normal human women like to do? And the answer was go shopping, which of course is one of the worst tropes about how to make a female character human. I think that Melissa Benoist in this particular version of the character manages to balance sort of the human woman side of things with the superhero side of things pretty well.
We do know that this version of Supergirl loves ice cream.
That's true.
Yes.
It provides us with one of the best moments in the first season.
Yeah, it never feels overly sexist. It just feels appropriate for this character. Right? That she just loves sweets and she's constantly eating sweets. Also, I really don't like commenting on female smiles, but her smile is just absolutely infectious. Whenever you see like the pictures of her, or she's standing in her Supergirl pose, like everything about her is just hope and strength and sunshine and everything that Superman should be.
And by the way, if one of the big things that happens, it is in the pilot when Kara is upset with Kat for naming Supergirl Supergirl. They did a very smart thing. First of all, in the writing, but also having Callista Flockhart deliver it, basically saying, "What's wrong with calling Supergirl a girl?" Grown Cat Grant says, "I'm a girl." And I'm who I am. So really, if there's anybody who has a problem with being, calling Supergirl Supergirl, it's you. And of course, you is Kara, but also anybody watching the show.
Now, as a white man, I'm going to go ahead and comment on this. There are a few moments, I believe, in the first episode, really, or the first 2 or 3 episodes, where they are incredibly heavy-handed about the sexism. I can't remember which one it is. I think it is in the second episode where she's fighting one of the prisoners, and someone at the DEA says, "Oh, she's going to lose," and Alex Danvers goes, "Why? Because she's a girl?"
Yeah, but I don't know. Like, I think that the problem with the first season, or at least the first part of the first season, is that the first couple episodes do suffer from pilotitis, right? Like, there's like a lot going on in the first couple of episodes, and so maybe that's why it comes off as like particularly heavy-handed. But also, I feel like the character who says that is Hank Henshaw, who is the head of the DEO, and we're going to talk a lot about him and who he is and who he isn't later. I feel like they were trying really hard to convince us that he was one type of character, so that way they could switch him out with a different kind of character later, like have that sort of twist that comes halfway through the season. So I that could also be part of the heavy-handedness there, is them trying to convince us, oh, he's a jerk, he's a sexist jerk, even though we're going to find out later that's not who he is at all.
Right. I also, so to kind of talk about, especially the earlier part of this, Andrew Kreisberg had a heavier role in the beginning of Supergirl. Are you guys familiar with what happened with Andrew Kreisberg, or Andy Kreisberg?
Yes.
Yes.
He
was Me Too'd, which I think we can use as a verb now. There was a lot of problems in the writing room, especially between him and some fellow female writers, that caused him to be written out of this entire Arrowverse, even though he still gets credit for launching some of these properties.
I mean, unfortunately, he's going to have to get credit because, that's how guild rules work, and
he is no longer involved, though, with
correct.
These properties. It turns out the CW does take that pretty seriously, does take allegations of sexual harassment very seriously, which is good.
19 reports. I mean, that's... Oof.
Well, what's really interesting about Kreisberg, too, without going too much into it, there has been a lot of words written about CBS. CBS has probably the most terrible reputation with these kinds of issues. Star Trek Discovery. It's which one's the one in New Orleans? Is it NCIS? Are we done with CSIs? But NCIS, New Orleans, and other shows just have repeated issues with this. And maybe it's better that Supergirl ended up on the CW because, despite what many CBS shows have had, the CW, in particular Berlanti and et al., were really proactive in getting rid of Kreisberg.
But it does make me wonder if some of this heavy-handed writing might be a guy who thinks he's a feminist, thinks he's woke, writing these lines.
I could definitely see that. I mean, we were just talking the other night about like moments when you realize that a male writer has written this show, and that definitely could be said of the pilot. Although, I mean, if that is true, kudos to all of the actresses for delivering these lines fairly believably. I mean, you still get the sense from the pilot and the next episode that, you know, especially the Danvers sisters are they're pretty badass, especially Alex Danvers, who might be my favorite character on this show.
Yeah, and her character goes through so many really good moments. Anyway, let's jump to the next person in the main cast, Mehcad Brooks as Jimmy Olsen,
who comic book fans will recognize as being Superman's sidekick.
Superman's buddy.
Yeah, if you're disappointed that you're not seeing Superman, here's a consolation prize. I feel like that's his reason for existing. It's something to give people to cling to who are maybe a little reluctant about Supergirl.
Well, I think, you know, and I'm sure we'll continue to talk about this as we go throughout Supergirl. We were complaining a lot the last couple episodes about the way that Arrow likes to borrow from the Batman Rogues Gallery and Batman plot lines, and how bad that sort of makes Arrow seem, that it, you know, it can't rely on its own source material. Supergirl, I think, actually manages, for the most part, with some exceptions that I'm sure we'll talk about, I think that Supergirl actually manages to balance the references to Superman with its own. It doesn't feel like a show that's reaching too far into the Superman mythos, and part of that might be the origin of the character. I mean, Supergirl is supposed to be Kal-El, Superman's cousin, and so obviously there are going to be some things that they have in common. You know, they're both from a planet that exploded. They both, you know, are refugees to Earth. They both have very similar powers. There are moments where it gets a little bit too into the Superman part of the mythos, but for the most part, even with additions like Jimmy Olsen, it does feel a lot like its own show. Like she is a separate entity, which I think when I first started watching it, I was really worried that she would just sort of be subsumed into the Superman mythos, but I think they do, for the most part, a fairly good job of balancing it. And Jimmy Olsen feels like his own character in this show. He doesn't feel, even though he makes these little references to Superman, he doesn't feel like, you know, just Superman's presence in the show.
Well, and he does go by James, right? So it's kind of a distancing. You know, this isn't the little kid Jimmy Olsen from the comic books. This is a grown person, you know.
They also, you know, another thing just to mention for diversity, they do cast him as a black man, which I think becomes very important later on in Supergirl.
Yeah, in later seasons, they definitely give him material to work with that involves his blackness. Same with the actor who plays Hank Henshaw, David Harewood, who is also black. They managed to integrate those in ways that I think are really interesting for those characters later on.
Next up, we have Chyler Leigh as Alex Danvers.
Playing yet another character named Alex. Those who are still on or still on the Shonda Rhimes train, or who got off a long time ago, will recognize her as a Grey's Anatomy alum. She is Lexi Gray, Little Gray from Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah,
much better here than she was in Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah, so basically what happened is to get a little life experience out in the real world, she went to work. She went deep undercover at Seattle Grace as Lexi, and then when she came to her untimely death, that was really just an extraction, so she could begin her work with the DEO. So that's how all that went down.
Yeah. So really, Lexi Gray is Alex Danvers. Is that what you're telling us? Okay.
Absolutely.
No, Alex Danvers is one of my favorite characters on the show. She is the adopted sister of Kara Danvers. So when I guess we haven't really talked about sort of the premise of the show. When Kara leaves, Kara Zor-El leaves Krypton. She's sent away from Krypton as it's like right before it explodes. To protect her cousin Kal-El, her infant cousin. She does not actually make it to Earth before her cousin does. She's sucked into the Phantom Zone where she sort of hibernates, I guess, for 24 years. At Phantom Zone, I guess the time is a little wibbly wobbly here. But she eventually makes it to Earth, but her cousin's already an adult, so he decides that he wants to replicate the same sort of healthy childhood that he had. So he puts her in with an adoptive family, the Danvers, and they already have a daughter named Alex. And so that's where we get this relationship between Alex and Kara, which I really think their relationship is the heart of this show. I mean, I don't think this show would be as good at all without the relationship between the two of them and the ways that in which they represent different forms of female characters, I think.
They are each other's heroes consistently through the series. We see that through flashbacks of them as children, but mostly, through the work that Melissa Benoist and Kyler Lee do. Of course, their parents, who we do see throughout the series, Dean Cain, former Superman, and Helen Slater, former Supergirl, as well. So
yeah, Helen Slater actually, when I first saw that Helen Slater was in this, I thought it was just like a one-off cameo. Like, she was just going to be like the mom in the background, but she's actually in this first season quite a bit. She's in a few episodes.
Yeah, this show I think is like king of the cameo in the Arrowverse. There's so many great casting, and probably because there's been so many iterations of Superman in the previous. I mean, her father is played by Dean Cain, which is wonderful.
Yeah, I really like though what you said, Sam, about them being each other's heroes, Alex and Kara, because I think a lot of times on shows like this, I mean, unfortunately, if we surveyed all of television, we wouldn't find very many shows where there are two female characters that are featured as prominently as these two are, but much less two female characters that aren't in competition, that are constantly helping each other, challenging each other, but challenging each other in ways that make each other grow, which I think works really well in this show.
Tessa, are you saying that television and show business in general are slanted against women?
Well, they fail the Bechdel test on a pretty regular basis. The show does not fail the Bechdel test. It is very, very conscious of the fact that it does not fail the Bechdel test, for sure.
Just to give listeners who are interested and don't know the Bechdel test, could you define the test?
Of course. Everyone should know about the Bechdel test, not because it necessarily proves whether a property is feminist or not, but because it provides us with an interesting thought experiment. So it's named the Bechdel test after Alison Bechdel, who is a pretty famous comic book writer, graphic novel writer herself. She basically said, here's the test in all its simplicity. In order to pass the test, a property has to have more than one female character, so at least two female characters, and they have to have one conversation where they do not talk about the male characters, like where they talk about something that does not involve either the male characters and it does not involve children, like talking about children. And she says that's it. That's all you have to do for a property to pass the test is it has to have two characters, at least two characters, and they have to have a conversation, not about men, not about children. You would be very surprised at how many properties fail this test. And it really, once you start thinking about that, a test, when you watch properties, you start to realize how many either don't have more than one female character, or the female characters are basically, their whole entire character development is subservient to the male storyline, either as a romantic interest or, as a mother or something else. And so again, like it's an interesting thought experiment, and but Alison Bechdel has been quick to point out that just because a property passes the Bechdel test doesn't mean that it's feminist, and if it fails the Bechdel test, it doesn't mean that it's not feminist. It's just a good thought experiment to talk about how many female characters there are and how they're used in storytelling.
And you can think about Arrow, and think about sure, Laurel and Sarah. Sometimes in early seasons are very often in the room together. They're always talking about Oliver or their dad Quentin. And you think about Flash. And you think about how strong of a character Caitlin maybe isn't yet, but will become. but she's almost always surrounded by the boys. So this is a Supergirl is a show that almost in every episode passes the test, whereas you would have to work to find episodes of Arrow and Flash and early episodes of Legends that pass.
And that's not to say that there aren't male characters or aren't good male characters on Supergirl. It just means that there's a lot of focus being paid to the female characters and how they're being deployed in the story.
Yeah, and with that in mind, let's talk about I believe the only white male character in the main cast, Jeremy Jordan as Win Scott.
Purely coincidentally, the most boring character of the cast, I'm sure.
Okay, this is where we disagree. I maybe for the first half of the season, I thought he was super boring. But
He's
go ahead.
Cisco.
Go ahead.
He'll never be Cisco.
I understand that. Go ahead and describe him. Why do you think he's boring?
I have nothing to say about him. That's why he's boring. It's just he likes Kara, and she trusts him, and that's cool.
So Win in this story functions as, like you said, kind of functions as the Cisco in the Flash or Felicity in Arrow. He is, of course, the magic hacker. Which again, like these shows are not very concerned with how hacking actually works. I mean, if you know anything about computers, it's assumed that you're able to like do anything and basically have like magical powers. And so he works at the same place that Kara does. He works at Catco, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But basically he's just a computer IT nerd, and he has this crush on Kara for the beginning. I'm really glad they moved past that fairly quickly. And he is the first person that she trusts enough to tell about the Supergirl aspect, besides her family, obviously. And we get that pretty early on in the first episode.
By her dramatically throwing herself off a tall building.
Because he won't believe her when she says it the first time. I think he is kind of boring. He is kind of like relegated to the corner. That's basically all he does for the first half of the season. However, I think the best episode of this first season is Childish Things, which is a Win-centered episode. Childish Things is about, you find out that his father is actually this like very cartoonish supervillain who's been in jail all of these years for killing people with toys. Basically, he like designs these toys that kill people, which sounds like really hokey, but there's some really good acting by Jeremy Jordan in this episode. Conveying sort of this like, he's dismissed his father and turned his back on his father, but he's also very afraid that he'll become his father. And he knows his father's a psychopath, but he still like has all these feelings of like trying to live up to him. And I think it's a really masterfully well done episode that really makes the character way more interesting than he was before.
Okay. And for me, Win starts out kind of boring, and I think that is a symptom of being on CBS and being on actual network television. I don't think you can go as deep in his nerd references as you can with Cisco, and he's being written as being overly broad. He does get a good chunk nerdier and a good chunk more interesting, especially with the Toyman episode. That was a very solid episode. But for me, he's just kind of there, and I just don't find him to be particularly entertaining, especially considering where his character ends up going.
And I think that's fair. I mean, the Childish Things episode is clearly the best part of his character this first season, for sure. But that's partially, and we'll talk about her in a minute, that's partially because in the later seasons, he has to take on some of the roles that Cat Grant had earlier on in this first season.
Yeah, and with that, let's go on to the next character, David Harwood, who I affectionately call the British Lance Reddick. He just is a character actor who just has this deep, booming voice. I know him most from Selfie, which was a underappreciated comedy.
Very underappreciated. I'm still mad about it.
Thank you. He for the first half he just plays what Hank Henshaw, But we find out towards the second half that he is Martian Manhunter, John Jones.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I said earlier that Alex and Kara are really the heart of the show. I would say if there had to be another character that would contribute to that, it would be John Jones, the Martian Manhunter. I mean, like we said earlier, part of the problem I think is that they really wanted this twist to land, and unfortunately, that means that he has to act in like some of these really weird, over the top, jerk, ways at the beginning of the season. But he really becomes like the father figure to both Kara and Alex, especially once you realize that he's the Martian Manhunter, and he is from Mars, right? He is a big green man, as he describes himself. Um, obviously playing a black DEO agent. Is that why he gets kicked out of the DEO at first? Just because they realize that he's not actually Hank Henshaw?
Yes.
Okay.
You can't have the anti-alien enforcement being run by a guy who lied and conned his way into it.
Right. But yeah, and he and Kara, and I assume others, as we go through the show, they obviously play like good aliens, and I think that this first season really it starts to delve into the parallels between the alien situation, the aliens coming to Earth situation, and immigration, which becomes even more clear in later seasons. But I think that when we have these conversations about the show, Hank Henshaw, John Jones, and Kara are really at the heart of it, right? Because he is impersonating a human, a very notorious anti-alien human, leading an anti-alien task force organization, but he is in fact an alien himself, and one that has a lot of really high moral standards. He's not only an alien though; he's a refugee. His planet Mars has been taken over by the white Martians, and all the green Martians have been killed. So we think, and so he is the survivor of a genocide, and I think that really informs his character in ways that pay off better in later seasons than they do in this particular season.
Right. And I think that is, again, a case of being on network television where they are trying to appeal to as many people as possible, trying not really to stoke too much controversy. And once they get to the CW, they can actually, they allow their writers to actually make some points. And Arrow also really starts to lean heavily into political every couple episodes as well. And I think it makes it more interesting when writers have a point that they're trying to make and they're able to use these characters to make that point.
Yeah, and I think the show, again, maybe not in this first season, but I think the show is really interested in intersections. I think they're interested in the intersection between gender and immigration in Kara, and I think they're interested in the intersection between race and immigration with John Jones. And I think we get to see more of that, like you said, in later seasons when they finally come home to the CW. But I think we can see the seeds of that in this first season, even if, again, it's not going to delve too deeply into it.
And with that, let's also talk about probably the biggest name, I think, on this list, Callista Flockhart as Cat Grant.
She's great. I love her. I miss her so much. I mean, part of the thing is Cat Grant, Callista Flockhart existed when the show was on CBS, right? And she really gets this show going. But then when they moved to CW, they had to move all their filming. And Callista Flockhart was not going to leave Harrison Ford to his own devices. So she sort of gets a reoccurring role on the show as opposed to a regular role on the show. I think she actually is more of a Cisco character in this show, I think, than Wynn is, even though Wynn is the hacker type, the person who does the science. She's the one who's making pop culture references all the time. She's sort of this Devil Wears Prada boss, right? She's the impossible boss, and Kara's her assistant. And she's always asking her for these, like, impossible things, and she's always very mean to everybody. But, she makes these great references to pop culture. I mean, I think one of my favorite things that she says in the entire first season is when during the crossover when Barry Allen shows up, when she says, "You all look like the attractive and yet racially diverse cast of a CW show." And it's just this wonderful bit of like meta pop culture commentary. At one point she even says, in a very self-deprecating sort of way, you can tell Harrison Ford that I won't go out with him. And of course they're married, right? So like it's a real, she's such a really interesting character, because she could so easily fall into the shrill, like, bitch boss, mode, but she's also presented to us as this, like, feminist, like, character who has built this media empire, who understands a lot of the differences between right and wrong, and who has had to really advocate for herself, even though it means that she comes across as being very unpleasant to other people. And I think that that's a really good, again, it's another view of what it means to be a strong woman, right? We get a couple of different versions of that, and I think the more versions we have of it, the better the show becomes. What do you think of Cat Grant,
Sam?
Sam? He's thinking.
I'll just comment really quickly that and Cat Grant also has this beautiful thing going on where you don't really know if she knows that Kara is Supergirl. Like, there will be moments where she is very convinced, and then moments where you know, it's just this thing where you're like, okay, she might know, but she's not bringing it up. Like there's all these interesting moments of her being this kind of bitch boss, but also truly caring about her underlings, that really, it gives a lot of layers to the show. And I miss her, but it also makes her occasional appearances really fun.
Yeah, and I think that the pop culture stuff that she does in the first season, I think it's relegated to Win later. Like, in later seasons, he has to take on sort of being the pop culture quippy guy like Cisco is in The Flash. I don't think he does it as well as her. I think that she is, I mean, because you get, and she has like this crazy feud that you don't really know anything about with Lois Lane. Like, she's always dissing Lois Lane, and she's always, I mean, I just think that she's such a beautifully complex character. I could talk about her for a long time, so I'll stop.
Okay, yeah, we do have to get going. But of course, you know, we do know that Sam hates strong female characters, so that's why he's being so quiet right now.
I do. I'm so glad that when she left in the second season, we got Snapper in her place. The news reporter that Kara wants to work for. So I'm really glad that we had such a typical traditional jerk dude as her boss. It's a really funny replacement that happens in season 2, and I think it's really played for commentary on that. But yeah, it was a shame when she left. Alas, but you know, when we move over to CW, it's better.
It's nice that we still get to see her, like you said.
Every so often.
She adds something to the show.
Now, really going over the actual story of this first season, there's a running storyline where a alien prison also crashes and all the prisoners get free, giving a perfect background for villain of the week type work. You know, you have aliens of different powers, different origins, and different motivations running around and causing kinds of havoc. And you also have her aunt, played by
Laura Benanti.
Yes.
Who also plays her mother in flashbacks, in various flashbacks.
Yes, and being kind of a, what would you call it? Like a resistance fighter? I mean, technically they call her like an eco-terrorist, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically, my problem is that, like, the plot is the least interesting part of Supergirl, and this is where I actually think they dip a little too heavily into the Superman side, because Astra, and then is it her husband, Non, her husband, anyway.
Yes, Non.
They're kind of Zod ripoffs, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, isn't that what we're supposed to think?
Absolutely.
I mean, they're escapees from Fort Ross. They tried to take over Krypton before it exploded to save Krypton.
And Fort Ross was in the Phantom Zone.
Right. And so there's a lot of... It just, to me, it just was like, oh, this is Zod. This is Zod. Right? Except for it's a female Zod, because we have a female superhero. So, and she's her aunt.
Yeah,
I guess. You know. But yeah, I mean, I just didn't think it was that interesting in terms of an overarching plot. I mean, I guess you got some really interesting, like, family work. But yeah, she's an eco-terrorist. She wants to prevent the Earth from going through the same upheaval as Krypton.
Yeah.
That's it. Like, there's not a lot else to that plan.
And with that, like, I think we can just cover what is truly, I believe, the best episode of this season, because it is the most fun, World's Finest.
Yes. The best crossover that happened that year. Yeah, we get a crossover between Supergirl and the Flash.
And this begins their beautiful, beautiful friendship, because her and Barry are the chemistry and joy and just comedic timing, everything about them interacting is amazing.
Yes, Kara is the third character who is more suited for Barry than Iris. So, I mean, he is finding, there's this whole, the whole theory about, well, what if your soulmate is not in the same town as you? Are you ever going to meet your soulmate? Well, Barry has found somebody else who is more his soulmate than Iris is on a completely different universe. So, keep looking, folks.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the thing, too, with Crisis, this is not going to be an issue anymore, but because this started in CBS, we had to say that Supergirl was on a different Earth than the main Arrowverse.
And really, isn't that what LA is? A different Earth?
Different Earth.
It vibrates at a different frequency, right?
Yeah, so. National City is supposed to be LA, right? Basically.
Well, I mean, Supergirl was filmed in LA.
Fair enough. But, yeah, the crossover is really great because Flash, and remember, this is the same season that he's fighting Zoom, right? The same one as we talked about last week. So he's testing out his speed, and at one point he pops out of the first Earth and into Kara's Earth. Do we know what number Kara's Earth is? Do we ever get a number?
We do eventually.
It's like in the 30s, maybe. Anyway,
some listeners are screaming at you right now.
Yeah, I know. Like, I just can't think of it. I know that it's in the 30s. I'm pretty sure it's in the 30s. But yeah, I mean, we see Barry Allen get to interact with Kara Danvers, and the two of them. Oh, did you find it?
It's Earth 38.
Oh yeah, wrong. See, I wasn't wrong. But yeah, I mean, the two of them, I think, understand each other in ways that perhaps none of the other characters do. They're two very optimistic people who are dealing with a lot of really kind of bad things, and we talked about how in that episode comes right after she was infected with the red kryptonite. So there's a storyline where she's infected with red kryptonite, and she does some bad things because, as she puts it made me crazy. And she is sort of recovering from that in World's Finest, the crossover episode. And she's dealing with the fact that she's trying to win back sort of the support of all of these people who feel betrayed by her. And in comes Barry, who is very used to people feeling betrayed by him for some of the dumber things that he's done. And I think that they really, not only do they have a lot of great chemistry, but they really, as characters, understand, what it's like to try your best, but, have people not believe in you, or have people mistrust you or mistrust your intentions. And plus, they're the superpowered people in this universe, right? We haven't seen Superman yet. They communicate mainly via text message. And so it was really nice to see, like, even just, like, the race between them at the end of the episode. Like, it was just nice to see her, like, get to kind of, stretch out her powers a little bit.
And the other thing that this episode does really well is, along with Legends, this particular episode, and I wonder if they knew or had a thought that the show was not going to be on CBS much sooner. But this, along with Legends, season 1 really opens up the universe a lot. We've seen Barry and Oliver and their respective crews kind of trade back and forth on their shows, but this is a one-way crossover. None of the Supergirl characters can come over to the CW, but I guess they were able to use that CBS money to fly Grant Gustin down for a couple of days, but we get to see the different palettes of the shows. And like I said, this is mostly a one-way crossover, but we do get, for Flash viewers, we get the benefit of a joke, where Harry Wells, or it was either Harry or Cisco, it was Harry, who drew on the board in earlier for Joe on the season of Flash trying to understand the multiverse, and it's a really just stupid drawing that doesn't help. Barry draws an even more unhelpful drawing in this episode for Kara's crew, and that's like the one. Thanks, guys, for following us over from the CW. Here's a joke for you. But it really does open up how different characters from different shows are going to interact with each other, even though, ironically, it's just one character from one show coming over. It does a lot to establish for what the multiverse will be.
And we get the great moment with the ice cream. Sam's favorite moment on any Arrowverse show, I believe, is the scene where he goes to get ice cream. He's trying to demonstrate his speed, so he goes and he gives everyone an ice cream cone, and Kara's only reaction is yes, which is like one of the best moments.
And they both have to eat 10,000 calories a day, so they get to go eat ice cream and donuts.
Yeah, it's pretty great, and we get Barry's at the very end when they're about to fight the two villains of the week, Livewire and Banshee, Silver Banshee. I'm sorry. And he's like, let's settle this like women. And they all look at him and he's like, what? There's more of you here. And it's just this great moment of Barry Allen trying not to be a misogynist. And it's just a great episode. It makes you feel really great after watching it.
So remember, Barry Allen destroyed the fabric of his own universe. Irrevocably destroys the fabric of his own universe. But he's not a misogynist. So he has that.
He will always have.
He will.
Hashtag woke.
That's right.
Okay, let's go ahead and jump into where I think that this all, Crisis and everything really starts, and it's the massively hyped crossover that results in Legends of Tomorrow.
So what you're saying is Crisis is caused by Rory from one property coming over and not being Rory, but being a Time Lord, but not actually a Time Lord, and working with a person whose name actually is Rory.
Yes.
That's what broke the universe, is too many Rorys.
But he doesn't appear in the crossover.
None of whom are the Doctor.
We will talk about Legends in a minute.
Let's talk about this crossover. Crossover starts. Oh man, I can't remember. I think it was an Arrow episode.
No, it's Flash, because Vandal Savage first comes to Central City and
because Cisco is dating Kendra.
Cisco is dating Kendra Saunders,
who is a barista.
Is a barista and likes to remind us that she's a barista in every single episode.
Okay, let's talk about Kendra, because Kendra is so important, but only to this season of Legends. Kendra is the reincarnation of Hawkgirl.
Is it Shiara or Shiara? She's an ancient Egyptian priestess that nobody can decide how to pronounce her name. In fact, I think Vandal Savage even pronounces her name 2 different ways. And so basically she is Hawkgirl and Hawkman, it's Hawkman, right? Are doomed to be reincarnated together throughout eternity. They've lived 206 times. And they always find each other because they're in love with each other, I guess. And each time they are alive, they are killed by this immortal Vandal Savage. And basically, Vandal Savage can be summed up. He's basically an ancient Egyptian incel who wanted to sleep with Ciara, or however you say her name. She wasn't into him, so he decided to kill her and become an immortal right-wing dictator. That's it. That's Vandal Savage right there. Like,
because of the power of a meteor.
Yeah. There's also some meteorites. The ancient Egyptian stuff, to be completely honest with you, is not my favorite part of any of this. Like, it's very confusing, and it doesn't make me care about any of the characters because it seems really hokey. And, like, even more hokey than these shows tend to be sometimes. It seemed very out of place. But yeah, like, he kills both of them because she wouldn't sleep with him. She was in love with Hawkman, whose original name I cannot remember and don't really care about. And a meteor crashed at the same time that he killed them, and so it cursed them all to immortality. So basically, Vandal Savage keeps trying to kill her in every single incarnation that she is in, and has succeeded so far. 206 times he's killed her, and so that's basically the premise of the crossover, right? Because she doesn't remember who she is at the beginning. She just thinks she's Kendra Saunders, and she's dating Cisco, and breaks Cisco's heart. I mean, like, right? Like, that's the part I cared about, was poor Cisco. But yeah, I mean, so the Vandal Savage shows up, and he's ready to kill her again, and that's how this crossover gets started.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that this crossover ruined a very distinct childhood memory for me because I had all the Justice League action figures, and Hawkman is cool because his wings flap. I mean, like, the Flash is kind of a lame one because his legs move, and Superman and Batman just had the things where their arms move with accessories, but Hawkman's wings move. He was one of my favorite toys. This character is awful.
Yeah.
So, it ruined my childhood.
Like, I don't know. Like, I just feel like we were supposed to care about them, and there's just not anything that makes us want to care about them. I mean, Kendra is very one note. She's very, like, I don't remember. I never asked for this. Like, she doesn't even seem like she is a superhero. You know, like, I understand reluctant superheroes, but she takes it to a whole new level. And then Carter, who's Hawkman, is just like I'm in love with you. And that's his whole character. I'm in love with you. Like, because I'm in love with you. And he remembers everything, right? Like, he remembers everything, and he shows up and he saves her, but she doesn't remember anything. And I don't think she actually does remember most things until much later on in Legends, actually.
Really, the best part of the crossover is the you know the precursor to Flashpoint. You know, the fact that Barry does a do-over here, and it's a foreshadowing of things to come later. That's really where the crossover, I think, gets interesting.
Yeah, so for those of you who are still kind of struggling with where this falls in the Legends, so the first episode is The Flash, the second episode of the crossover is Arrow, but both episodes function as a backdoor pilot for Legends of Tomorrow, which started mid-season, so it started shortly after the crossover aired. But the only characters from Legends of Tomorrow that are in it are Hawkgirl, Hawkman, and Vandal Savage. So I think that was the other part of the problem, is that it was a backdoor pilot, but it didn't have any of the actual interesting things about Legends of Tomorrow in it. Like, it didn't have Rip Hunter, it didn't have any of the other characters, or the idea of time travel, except for when Barry, in the last episode of the crossover, Vandal Savage manages to kill everyone, and so Barry, who barely survives, runs back in time, and he tells Oliver, who actually surprisingly makes a better and more responsible decision about time travel than Barry ever has. Like, but, because, you know, he's like, okay, don't tell anyone, but just tell me, like, the one thing that made it go wrong, and I'll try to fix it. Like, that's like Oliver actually thinks about time travel a lot more, responsibly, I think, than Barry does in this episode. Even though he chooses to still lie to Felicity, which we talked about in Arrow causes a lot of problems later on.
As a backdoor pilot, Berlanti, Guggenheim, and friends do a really smart thing of making forward progress on both the current seasons of Flash and Arrow, and also reinforcing the strengths of the Flash and Arrow crossover, but at the same time, kind of isolating this Hawkman and Hawkgirl and Vandal Savage storyline. That's smart. What in retrospect is kind of a miracle is, hey, did you guys enjoy that story? The Hawkgirl, Hawkman, Vandal Savage thing? Cool, we're going to do a whole show about that. Won't that be fun? Come watch it. It's a miracle Legends lasted.
Okay. See, and this is one of the things that I always find to be really rewarding about the crossovers is usually the things that are going on are relevant to whatever television show is, it's in. Like, one of the things that the Buffy episode, Once More with Feeling, which fans or casual fans might know as the musical episode, I think is really important because even though it's a episode based fully on a gimmick, it really pushes the narrative of the entire season as a whole.
And it also does things with, it's like the beginning of the end for Xander and Anya, right? So like even plot related things, it does character based things too. That's a really good, point there.
Yeah, and I don't know. I feel like this crossover maybe did that to a lesser extent. This is my least favorite crossover. I think there are plenty of other crossovers that do a better job of
really
that.
Because this crossover has the most charismatic villain.
Oh my god. Vandal Savage is a terrible villain.
Okay.
Although I will say, we talked about this whole season is worth it just for the thing that happens in the last season of Legends with Vandal Savage. Like,
and we'll get to that, but this crossover is worth it for the brilliant moment of comedy where you find out Vandal Savage is being introduced and he's a stowaway, and he says to the captain, after the captain of the boat says, "Well, you're not going anywhere with those handcuffs on," he's like, "The handcuffs are on you." And the captain looks at his wrists, sees that he has handcuffs on, calls him Houdini, and then he goes, "No, I actually taught him." And it is so campy, and it sets up a really fun villain that never lives up to this one moment.
Yeah, he's just not. I think, if they had continued to play him like that, then maybe it would have worked. But instead, he just comes across as like a vampire without being cool.
Like, you can't have. I don't know. Can you have a quippy bad guy who is also a genocidal murderer?
Like,
can you?
You do have a quippy bad guy at the very, very end of this.
Well, that's true.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's just it's also very unclear what exactly his powers are, because he seems like he's overpowered in some episodes, but then underpowered in other episodes. Like, what makes him immortal? What exactly, is it just experience that has taught him to fight this well? We see these episodes where he takes down, 10 or more, people who are fighting him in, 2 seconds. And then other episodes where he's, struggling to fight, Sarah. Which is fair. Sarah's pretty awesome. But, it just doesn't seem like they were very clear either on what exactly abilities that he has.
Right. And I'm also going to say that besides the backstory of Rip Hunter, Vandal Savage is the least influential villain in the entire Arrowverse.
Yeah, considering that Damien Dark shows up on a combined 27 seasons of the Arrowverse, despite the fact that we have significantly less seasons than that, he is, compared to Damien Dark, like you said, he's really nothing. When he's gone, he is immediately forgotten, which is great.
Yeah, I actually kind of forgot he was the villain of this, that he was on Legends until we had to sit down and talk about this first season. Like, I was like, oh yeah, it was Vandal Savage. But yeah, it's just, they try really hard, they don't, it doesn't land.
Right. And pretty much, I think the only thing that really happens in this crossover is they fight Vandal Savage. They're actually able to beat him. They leave. Everything seems fine except for Cisco's heart. And then Malcolm Merlyn comes out of nowhere.
And they weren't even clear how that really happened. Like, even in, like, the pilot episode of Legends, they're like, he could be regenerated from even a cell. But we never actually see, like, aren't the Lazarus Pits dead? Like, what? How did he come back? Like, that's all off screen.
What does he say exactly? He says, like, you owe me one, buddy?
Yep.
Yeah, that is exactly what he says, actually. Yeah,
It's almost like they didn't exactly know what they were going to do at this point. Like, the writing. Like, this is a classic case of when a paper is due and it's going to lead to another paper, but you haven't thought about the other paper, so you just kind of half-ass the first one and make it work. Or to borrow a phrase that's particularly appropriate considering the characters we don't like, they just decided to wing it.
Also, Thea does mention seeing a movie with a bunch of superheroes in a farmhouse, which is a clear reference to Avengers.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. I forgot that the Marvel references actually become more prevalent later on, especially in the Flash for some reason, which I think is odd because usually they try not to, advertise a property other than their own. But it's funny that Marvel has gotten that ubiquitous that we start hearing more and more Marvel references later on.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about actual Legends of Tomorrow and not this crossover. This crossover is the weakest of the crossovers. I do agree. And it really is not helped by just how terrible Vandal Savage is, but also just how chemistryless Hawkman and Hawkgirl are.
Yeah, I would agree. I would very much agree. I mean, the crossover was more interesting for the elements that had to do with the Flash and the Arrow than it was for the elements that introduced Legends of Tomorrow.
Right. And speaking of Legends of Tomorrow, let's go ahead and discuss what Legends of Tomorrow even is.
I made a discovery today. DC's Legends of Tomorrow is DC's A-Team with too many characters. You have Rip Hunter, the Hannibal, but then Sarah Lance is also Hannibal. You have Firestorm as B.A. Baracus, except you also have Mick Rory as B.A. Baracus. You have Ray Palmer, as the one and only Face, so that actually works out. That's great. And then we have Snart as Murdoch, and did I leave anybody else? And then there's Hawkman and Hawkgirl.
And they're nobody.
And that's
it.
No, they don't. We don't care about that.
Who are just afterthoughts.
It's okay. Hawkman's going to be gone in the second episode. Or really, since it's a 2-hour pilot, because that's what this show needed.
Yeah, it did.
He'll be gone by the first episode.
But yeah, I mean, the basic premise of Legends, which, by the way, I mean, I know we're going to rag on it for this first season, because the first season isn't that great, but it is my favorite show of the Arrowverse. Even with this terrible first season, there's a lot going for it.
It's the best show.
Oh yeah, like 100% the best show. And it gets better. Like, that's the thing, is that we've been talking about Arrow and the Flash a lot, and we talk a lot about how those first couple seasons are really the strongest seasons of those shows. This show ages well. Like, the first season's not that great, but as you go on, like, it gets better and better and better. They really work out what it is as a show. But the premise of the show is basically Rip Hunter, who is a time-traveling Doctor Who ripoff, ironically played by a Doctor Who alum, Arthur Darvill, he's like a time master? Right, not Time Lord.
Not to be confused with the Time Lord and the Master, who is also a Time Lord, just a Time Master.
All of that's like the least interesting part of this whole thing, but he's a Time Master, and that's an organization that's tasked with protecting time, and he hijacks a time ship, the Wave Rider, to go back in time and recruit a team, a special team of people, the Legends, who are going to basically fight Vandal Savage throughout history, because it turns out that Vandal Savage isn't just a dick. He is a homicidal right-wing dick. And he basically has been influencing all the bad people in history to do bad things. But eventually he'll decide he's tired of being in the shadows and will want to take a crack at the whole dictator thing himself. He'll take over the world, and he will kill Rip Hunter's wife and child in a very flagrant fridging moment at the beginning of this, which is not great. And so Rip Hunter decides that he's going to go back in time, recruit this team to travel throughout time with him to kill Vandal Savage. And that's it. That is the premise of the show, is that this is a group of people who are traveling in time to fight Vandal Savage, and then eventually, of course, fight other things in subsequent seasons.
And
does that seem right?
Yes,
yeah.
that seems about it. And the other, I think, really important hallmark about this show is that other than its infatuation with Back to the Future, specific beats from those movies, it also plays very tongue-in-cheek, but does the best it can with historical accuracy and maybe not historical accuracy, but historical moments. 2166 is called the Second Blitz, which of course goes back to World War II, but 2166 is also supposed to be reminiscent of 1666, which is the Great Fire in England. So they're one of the things that even the first season does really well is gives you a lot of those moments that if you know things about history, it's pretty neat.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like Futurama in that way, right? I mean, maybe not as clever as Futurama, but the idea that there's stuff going on in the background that is funny that you wouldn't necessarily notice it the first time you watch it.
Right. And you know what? Just because this is my only time to do my flawless British accent. Season 1, every episode opens with this line. In 2166, an immortal tyrant named Vandal Savage conquered the world and murdered my wife and child. I have assembled an elite team to hunt him throughout time and stop his rise to power. Unfortunately, my plan is opposed by the very body I'd sworn allegiance to, the Time Masters. In the future, my friends may not be heroes, but if we succeed, they will be remembered as legends.
That was pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's flawless.
It's like Arthur Darvill was here with us.
Yeah. The least interesting companion ever.
I loved him as Rory in Doctor Who. You will not convince me that he wasn't awesome in Doctor Who.
Yeah, I'm with Tess on this.
Yeah. I'm just sad that the opening of this episode is not, my name is Rip Hunter, and I'm a time traveler, so I have no idea how long I've been doing this.
But yeah, I mean, I think it also takes some beats from Doctor Who. I mean, not only do we have the Arthur Darvill, Doctor Who alum, but I think if we're going to say it's got a lot of stuff from Back to the Future, it also has a lot of stuff from Doctor Who.
It really does. Just no farting aliens, so that's great.
Well, I mean, it does have one of the characters as being the girl who waited, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
With
true.
Heatwave later on.
Well, and the Wave Rider does function as a sort of TARDIS. I mean, it's less quirky. It's less fun than Doctor Who, but it's fun in a different kind of way.
Yeah. Let's go down the list of Legends of Tomorrow, at least in this season. Okay?
So many characters.
We have the biggest cast, I think. Victor Garber as Professor Martin Stein.
Who was introduced in The Flash. Mm-hmm. All of these characters... Almost all these characters have been introduced in other shows, right? At this point.
Yes. Rip, okay. I believe, is the only one who's actually new. Right.
So Martin Stein introduced in The Flash, along, of course, with Franz Drama, who plays Jax. They're Firestorm together. Martin Stein is obviously older. He's a professor of whatever science they need him to practice that week.
And he is also he is Ray Palmer's former professor as well. So we have a little bit of worlds colliding, although Stein claims that he has no recollection of Ray Palmer.
Yeah, there's a little bit of Victor Garber. When they introduced him in The Flash, they were trying really hard to make him kind of a jerk. And I think...
And they succeeded.
Yeah, and he softens a lot in this show, but I think that they still like having these moments where he clearly thinks he's the smartest person in the room. And so he is most of the time.
Okay. We have Brandon Routh as Dr. Ray Palmer / the Atom.
/ haircut.
We get haircut in the first episode.
Very first episode.
Rory calls him haircut. And it's the start of a beautiful bromance.
Yes, it
really
is.
We have Katie Lotz as Sarah Lance.
I mean, we've talked about how much we love Sarah before. She's amazing.
You can't even be mad that they brought her back from the dead.
Yep. Even though it's really dumb, it brought us her back. And of course, in this first episode, we see her sort of dealing with the after effects of that. I think we see that really for the first half of the season is, her being brought back and having the bloodlust and also dealing with, her not feeling like she really has a place on Earth anymore, which contributes to her reasoning for going with them. But we also get the introduction of her as White Canary.
Yeah, we get, and what's really interesting, it's going to be as we go back through these and look at the seasons, one of the things I'm most interested in is how gradually she ditches the White Canary is a great idea, it's a great character, but her character arc is just being herself.
Well, I think part of it is that this show, in the first season, they were really trying to fit into the CW Arrowverse mold. And as it went along, they slowly began to realize that what makes the show great is that it's nuts. It has nothing to do with the rest of the Arrowverse except for when it does. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the problem in this first season is that they were trying to make all these people superheroes. And so she needed a costume. She needed to be White Canary in order to be a superhero. But then when they realized that actually they don't need to dress up, they don't need to, have sort of these iconic, shots of them, doing stuff like this, they really relaxed on it. I can't even tell you the last time I saw her in the White Canary costume in the fourth season.
This show becomes so great they didn't even get invited to last year's crossover.
Which they joke about.
Yeah.
But yeah, she is White Canary. And we get to see her talk to Laurel in this first episode because it's before the death of Laurel, encouraging her to become the White Canary.
Yeah. And
you see Oliver in this episode too.
Yeah. You got to see them for a little bit, and then we have Wentworth Miller as Captain Cold / Leonard Snart / the most awesome person on this cast.
Yeah, we talked before about how he is a really solid Leonard Snart and how despite being a criminal, he makes you love him. And I think that continues in this show. I mean, he is just, he's so snarky, all the time. And it's wonderful. Then
we have Dominic Purcell, who I think goes through one of the best character arcs through this. Dominic Purcell as Heatwave / Rory / Kronos.
Which we don't know for a good part of the season. He's doing double or triple duty even for the majority of the season.
Although it's funny because watching the first episode again, because Kronos is introduced as sort of this time-traveling agent of the Time Masters who's out to get them because they're, breaking all these rules. If you watch that first episode, you can totally hear his voice. Once you realize that it's him, it's obviously distorted, but once you realize that they were clearly planning this the whole time to have him be Kronos.
Oh yeah.
So I think that worked really well. That I will say, of all the long-term story arcs in this season that did not work well, this one did. It lands pretty well. And of course, Dominic Purcell and Wentworth Miller were on Prison Break. People will recognize them as being a classic duo.
Right. So just running over this season really quick, because while it's because this season is the worst season of Legends that I really didn't want to spend too much time on it. It's also the shortest season of Legends. Thankfully, it's a short 16 episodes. For the most part, it's pretty forgettable. This show has a problem. It's trying to take itself a little seriously. It's trying to deal with Vandal Savage, who's just, I mean, I just don't care. I just cannot care about him.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there by saying the show takes itself a little too seriously in the first season.
And it is that, you see some glimmers of what this show will eventually become, which is cool. You see it when they get stranded in 2046. Just watching it over again today, we were amazed. Smoke Tech, that's gonna happen. John Diggle Jr., who's that? You'll find out. And
the best old age makeup.
Yeah, and the whole cult of Slade is going to come up again in the season of Arrow that just finished. Like, some things pop up in this season that you have no idea they're going to pay off later.
So in the pilot episode, in the very first episode, there is a scene. It's near the very beginning. So the first place they go, once Rip has recruited them, and he tells them that they're all going to be legends eventually because they saved the world from Vandal Savage. And then promptly leaves the most disreputable people on the ship when they travel to 1975 to go talk to somebody about Vandal Savage. This is all MacGuffin the territory. But he leaves Snart, Rory, and Sarah on the ship because their skill set isn't needed yet. And there's just the great scene where they all just decide to go get a drink together in 1975. Sarah actually says, like, who wants to get weird in 1975? And
Mick Rory wants to listen to Captain and Tennille on the jukebox.
And that's what makes this show great. Like, everything about that scene is actually why this show works. Because you have such great chemistry between Sarah and Leonard Snart. You have really good, I like to call them Captain Canary. That's a real thing on the internet. Look it up. You have such great chemistry between Sarah and Rory, who becomes one of the best friendships on the entire show later, in later seasons. And they're having fun. They're making these great pop culture references. They have great musical cues. You get, these just weird fight scenes that happen for no reason. When they're having fun, when they let these characters just let their hair down, I think that's what makes this show great. And unfortunately, we get a little bit too little of that the first season.
Yeah, one of the highlight episodes I think is actually the Magnificent Eight with Jonah Hex.
Right, the Western episode.
yeah. Well, it's a lot of fun, and this show can introduce weird characters from DC lore, throw them in, throw them out on the same episode, and just be done with it. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the idea that Rip met up with Jonah and kind of screwed him over.
Well, Rip screws everyone over.
Right?
That's what Rip does, yeah.
I mean, the big twist in the first episode is that he actually lied to all of them, and that he chose them because they're actually unimportant. They're all B team.
Yeah,
right?
They're not the A team, they're the Expendables.
Right. Like, none of them are important to the timeline, and so removing them from the timeline won't cause any huge damage, except for it does, as we find out in 2046. But, like, basically, he can't have the Flash or Arrow, so he's going to settle for, a couple of, small-time crooks and a weird Iron Man ripoff, and
who should be dead,
and the not Black Canary, right?
Who should also be dead.
So, like, that's sort of the twist of the first part of this is very much like he tricks them all into coming with him, and then he constantly lies to them throughout the entire season about why he's there and what he's trying to do. But again, that's what makes this show great, is that they know from the very beginning that they're a bunch of B-team superheroes or criminals. I mean, Snart and Rory are only there because they want to steal stuff in time, right? Like, they're just like, we don't care about saving the Earth, we just want to, like, steal some stuff. But when the show works well, it's because it's showing you how messy it is when you try to become a better person. Like, all of these people have these issues. They're all either bad people or they have, they've come back to life and they're dealing with that, and but they're all trying to be better than what everyone expects them to be, and it doesn't work sometimes, and sometimes it works in really stupid ways. But I think that's what this show is. It's like a bunch of people who aren't actually, nobody expects anything great out of them because they've all been standing next to these truly great people for a really long time, and this is their chance to like try to do something about that. It's the Good Place, but with superheroes.
but as you point out, Andy, the episode where they introduce Jonah Hex, who does come back once or twice in later seasons,
and will come back in the giant crossover we're building to.
Oh, that's great. But as you point out, this is not a good season of television, and yes, there are some neat things that happen. I think the 2046 episode's also a standout in addition to the Magnificent Eight. And yes, there are relationships that are built throughout the season, but boy, this feels like a skippable, for the most part, season of television. We cannot get to the conclusion of this soon enough. Even the promise that we get for season 2 at the end of season 1 is infinitely better than anything Vandal Savage related.
Oh, that's definitely true. I will say the other episode that really stands out to me, though, is Destiny, which is the second to last episode. We've talked a lot about how Leonard Snart is such a great character, and the other thing this show does that some of the other shows aren't perhaps willing to do as easily is that they sacrifice a truly wonderful character. Here, Leonard Snart has this great character arc through the season, where he starts out as just like, I just want to go and I want to steal stuff and it'll be a great score. We could steal the Mona Lisa right off of Leonardo da Vinci's canvas. Like, that's actually stuff he says at the beginning. But then he becomes inspired by all these people to become a hero and to do better. And then he sacrifices himself, right? There's a lot of questions that come up in this particular season about agency, because the Time Masters are controlling everybody, I guess. They're controlling time. They're not just protecting it.
Well, and before we go away from Snart real fast, Tessa said something earlier today about Snart being sacrificed and what it does for his myriad of appearances in future seasons.
Oh yeah, he becomes this emotional touchstone of all of the shows, because he appears in later seasons of Legends of Tomorrow. Obviously, the versions that appear of him are in times before his death. Right? Because this is a time-traveling show, so you get to do that with characters. But he also appears on The Flash at least once after his death.
And we get to see Otherworld. We get to see Citizen Snart in the Nazi one.
That's
the
right.
Nazi crossover.
That's right. So we get these appearances by Leonard Snart, and it becomes this incredibly emotionally affecting moment on both the characters, but then also on us as audience members. Not only because, again, Leonard Snart is an amazing character no matter what version you're seeing, but also all of these characters become sort of attached to him and through him to each other. So you get this flirtation throughout the season between him and Sarah, but it's also just this genuine respect that they have for each other. You get, of course, Rory as his partner, right? And he continually refers to him as that, even long after he's dead. And so you get these really great, it's almost like his death is like a bonding activity for all of them, right? They become like a family through his death. But then also later on in the series, because Wentworth Miller had that contract where he could appear on any of the shows, he's used in a way that I think is very very affecting, as I said before.
Well, and something kind of interesting about Snart is that the way Barry Allen respects him after this, right? Barry brings him up quite a bit as an example of a villain that Barry had the effect on and drove him to be a good guy. And Barry also feels a little bit of guilt about Leonard's death, too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I think that actually gets back into where I was going with this originally. So with the Time Masters, the fact that they're actually, when we find out that they're actually controlling time, right? And that they're actually helping Vandal Savage become this dictator, and that they're controlling all of the Legends' lives, right, to this point. This is what really triggers Snart to sacrifice himself. His last lines are the quote from Pinocchio, right? Like, there ain't no strings on me. And I think that that's actually really, really, I mean, it is kind of cheesy and it's a little weird for the sense of the overall plot of this season, but it works really well in conjunction with Snart as a character, because the question this season is, can Snart change? Like, does he actually have agency, or are all of the things that contributed to him being a villain in the first place going to keep him down? There's a lot of references to people don't expect a lot from him. People have told him who he's going to be his whole life, and he's tired of that, right? He's tired of sort of submitting to everybody else's expectations. And so I think that this, of all the things that came through this season that weren't great, his character arc, I think, works really well. And it inspires Rory, who arguably is a worse person than Snart is, to become a hero in his own right in later seasons.
Right. And to try to fill the gap with haircut, which...
Yes.
There's a great thing at the end when Ray says to Rory, maybe this is what they wanted all along, for us to be friends in the new duo, and Rory just doesn't want that. We do though.
Yeah, we do. We want that romance. But yeah, I mean, is there anything else we need to talk about?
The amazingly heartfelt ending that made me cry, because the Legends break up, but they never really mention Hawkgirl and Hawkman again. Like, I just love it so much that they're like, okay, guys, yep, we're gonna go now. And then they, and then in season 2, they just like get the band back together, but don't really try very hard to get the characters who nobody liked back.
Well, yeah, it's like, at the very end of Legendary, the last episode, when they fly off and leave, and then 5 seconds later, Patrick Adams, as a member of the Justice Society of America.
I keep getting it mixed up with the JL.
We don't know his affiliation. We just know it's the guy from Suits, crash lands and says, "I'm back from the past to the future to tell you what you told me to tell you," and that is infinitely more interesting than anything that ever happened with Hawkman and Hawkgirl. So whatever, we're done.
We did forget an important character, though. I just realized.
Did we forget Charlie?
No.
Not later. Yet. Okay.
We forgot about Gideon.
Oh, Gideon
is a legend.
Yeah.
And she's like the only other female character besides Sarah in most of the seasons.
Well, she's not a... Is she a female? She's not a person.
Well, she presents
as
a
woman.
Female.
She's a woman.
She's a woman.
Yes.
She's the AI that controls the Wave Rider. And she mostly functions as just kind of like a computer from Star Trek, but she has a personality. She's
quippy.
She's quippy. She often tells them that whatever they're about to do is a bad idea. She's kind of like their mom, I feel like. A very ineffectual mom, but she is their mom.
Well, also, she's also the same AI that helps Eobard Thawne in The Flash.
Yes. Yeah. They've never completely explained the connection.
No.
But maybe that's something that'll come up in Crisis. How there are two Gideons.
Oh man, I
or
can't.
Is it the same Gideon?
I can't wait. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, this is such a boring season overall.
The characters save it.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why this season is watchable, is because the characters.
But this is also such a bad season that later on in season 4, they actually reference an AV Club review of season 1 of Legends of Tomorrow.
Really?
Yes. We
I
will
did not catch that joke. We'll have to talk about it.
Yes. It's the latest season, but they even they understand how bad this is. So.
Yeah, I mean, and the only other thing I can think of that I wrote down as I was watching this is that we've talked a lot about how these shows often talk about chosen family as opposed to biological family. This is clearly the best example of that. All these people who either have broken families or have no families, they all come together and they really are a family. Even though... So Hawkgirl and Hawkman will certainly not be the last characters to leave this show, although they are probably the most non-missable characters to leave this show. But there is sort of a revolving door for some of these characters. Like, we get new characters each season, and then some of them leave. So we'll have to talk about that too. How it's sort of a chosen family, but not really.
The only character that could make me happier leaving any Arrowverse show would be Iris West.
Well, I think you're bound for disappointment there, unfortunately.
Don't think that's going to happen.
It's going to happen. I need it to happen.
We'll have to talk about her storyline in the next season of Flash, because there was a real chance that she could have been written off the
Oh, that's
show.
right.
Yeah.
Some genuine peril.
Yeah.
Also, just really quick, there is a episode that features a kaiju fight. The episode Leviathan, at the end,
Oh, yeah.
Ant-Man / the Atom becomes Giant Man / Big Atom.
Can we say that Atom is like a cross between Ant-Man and Iron Man?
Yeah,
Because that's kind of what he is,
That's
right?
fair.
Okay. Continue, sorry.
No. It's just really cool because it's just a giant robot fight that I just thought it was awesome. Like, that was another moment that made me like go, okay, I do need to keep giving this show a shot.
Yeah, and it won't be the last kaiju fight either on this show. I think this show is best when it's not taking itself seriously, when it allows itself to just be like, look at this cool thing that we did. And those episodes tend to function the best, I think.
Yeah, and they also, we'll talk all about this in probably about 2 weeks when we cover the next season of Legends, where it starts to come into its own.
Yeah. Again, though, this is the show that gets better. Like, I think season 2 of Legends is better than season 1. I think season 3 is better than season 2, and I think season 4 is the best season.
Yeah, of the Arrowverse.
Of the Arrowverse. Like, so I'm really excited to keep talking about this, because as I'm going to start bad-mouthing the other shows more, this one will get better and better.
Yeah. All right, guys. That's about it. Do you want to go ahead and plug your pluggables?
I am on Twitter at Suela Tessa.
And I am at Sam_Morris79, and we're actually really looking forward to, so I will plug that on Twitter we're looking forward to tweeting all about the current seasons of the Arrowverse shows, as well as the Archieverse shows, in addition to continuing our headcanon with other shows, such as about the time when your Aunt Robin became a private detective.
Fall TV's about to start, you guys.
Oh, man. And other than that, you guys can find me on Twitter at HebrewsPaleale. You can go online to geek101podcast.com and find the podcast. You can also find it on iTunes or wherever fine podcasts are sold. That's all for today. Class is dismissed.